Steve Moore is here with me today. Wow, they're really putting the people out there, Steve, but they're putting them out there on outlets that nobody watches. So the only way people are going to hear about it is if they happen to listen to talk radio, and then they'll know it's not true.
Yeah, good to be with you, Martha. And by the way, I was literally just writing my weekly column on this, and the lead of my piece was, it was 30 some years ago that Bill Clinton famously said. You remember this one, Martha? I feel your pain.
Yes.
Now the Democrats are like, what are you talking about? You're not in any pain. Everything's wonderful. What's wrong with you people? Don't you understand that Joe Biden is the savior? And despite the fact that 2 out of 3 Americans have said consistently for 2 years they're worse off than they were when Trump was president. So they're trying to put lipstick on this pig. It isn't working. Now, look, we got a decent jobs report last week, and I was happy to see that. But even there, guess what? Most of the jobs were in either healthcare or government. They're not the kind of jobs that, most Americans are doing on Main Street. And, what's really interesting about this is, you talk about all these news outlets like the New York Times talking about how wonderful everything is. They're living in a bubble. It's like the Washington, D.C., Manhattan, Ivy League faculty lounge bubble that they think, everything's just wonderful in America. They've never been to Main Street. They have no idea what it is to go to the grocery store. Have you noticed, by the way, gas prices are rising again? We're headed back to $4 a gallon gasoline.
Well, and I was talking to some folks over the weekend that work for some pretty big companies, okay? And what they were telling me is that these jobs reports are wrong because in this particular company that I was talking to was an engineering company. He said because of COVID, they have had to recategorize all their jobs because nobody wants to come back to work. Mm-hmm. So they basically have fired their whole workforce, redone the job descriptions, and are allowing people to reapply for their jobs because they don't want them to work for home. And those get counted as new jobs, and they're not.
Yeah. About 2/3 of the jobs that Biden is taking credit for are jobs that existed, before COVID, and then they went away when all the businesses shut down, and now most of those jobs are back. But that doesn't have anything to do with Joe Biden. It's just the natural evolution of shutting down the businesses and then reopening them. Look, when you look at people's real incomes, how much they're making, their real take-home pay based on inflation, food prices are up 21%. Wages and salaries are down by about 4% over that period. So most people are struggling. And I just find it fascinating that all these talking heads in Washington are talking about, everything's so wonderful. These people in Washington are completely disconnected. What's happening in Georgia, what's happening in Idaho, what's happening in Iowa, what's happening in Montana. They have no idea. They've never even been outside the Beltway.
So what do you think is going to happen with some of these groups that have been traditionally Democratic, that it looks like from polling they are seriously considering shifting their votes? We kind of saw this kind of thing with the Reagan Democrats, back 40 years ago, and they stayed with Reagan for both of those terms. Are we seeing something like that again?
It sure looks like it. Look, it's too early to tell because we still have 7 months before the election, but it does appear, at least from polling, and again, polling can be wrong, but the polling is suggesting, more Black Americans, especially more Black males, are ready to vote for Trump, and Hispanics. And then the other group that's really starting to go a little bit more for Trump is younger people who don't see the job opportunities that they hope for. They don't see, the kind of path to the American dream. They can't afford, people in their 30s now can hardly afford to buy a house because mortgage payments are almost twice what they were under Trump. So there's a lot of disillusionment out there. And I have to give credit that David Axelrod, who was, Obama's chief political guy, and then Ron Klain, by the way, Ron Klain was the chief of staff for Joe Biden for the first 2 years in office. And even he said, look, this economy really isn't that good for working class people. So, I think the Democrats have a big problem with people in blue collar jobs. People are working 40 hours a week and just not seeing the paycheck keep pace with the cost of living.
Yeah, 5 years ago, you needed roughly about a combined income of about $77,000 to buy a starter home.
Right.
Now you need a combined
Over
income of
100.
120,000, roughly
Yeah.
in that neighborhood.
That's right.
And in
That's a lot of
areas
money.
like Atlanta, where there's
Yeah.
2.5% growth
Yep.
of people coming in for new jobs, which is huge.
Mhm.
Places like even where I live in Gainesville, because now,
Yep.
living an hour from Atlanta and a really nice walkable community is something people
Yeah.
don't mind doing. And the
Yep.
prices have gone up dramatically. I mean, there's really nothing for that person that's 25 to 30 years old and buying their first home.
Yeah, unless you want to buy a shack.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem. I mean, so look, I'm not trying to say that everything's going terrible in America. There are some positive things, but when you look at, here's my thing: the Democrats, why are people so angry? Everything's going so well. I was like, well, maybe it's because food prices are up 21%. Maybe it's because we have a porous border. Maybe because we have crime on the streets. Maybe it's because gasoline prices are headed back to $4 a gallon. Maybe it's the fact that people can't afford to take a vacation like they used to. Those kinds of things are the basic, nuts and bolts of a healthy economy, and people aren't feeling the love because they're really struggling. And we can do much better than this as a country. And by the way, I didn't even mention the fact that we're borrowing $1.5 trillion a year. Americans are onto that gambit.
Yeah, and it makes no sense, really, that, and this president still keeps going around saying that he has reduced the debt. I mean, it's like, to me, it is a basic.
I don't think anybody believes that.
I think it's a basic disqualifier if you don't know the difference between debt and deficit, number one. Okay?
Yeah.
And, but again, it's just so frustrating, Steve. And then I do see a glimmer, though, of hope. You see young people again going for, they call them the tool belt generation, and they're going for jobs that are high paying, low tech jobs, you know what I mean, that are that we need: plumbers, electricians, HVAC, that kind of thing. That is growing. We're also seeing a return to more traditional values. It's not the same way it happened in the 80s, but it's people returning to a more traditional way of thinking about things. The Vatican came out this morning and basically said that all of this gender affirming stuff is bad for people. And I don't know why it took them so long, but they came out and did that. But I am seeing a glimmer of hope as far as the way the culture's going.
Well, I think the culture is a big issue, and there's a real pushback against the DEI stuff, the fact that the putting climate change over people's livelihoods and our ability to buy the energy we want, the fact that the government wants to tell you what kind of car you can buy. I mean, those are just things that are like big brother nanny state stuff that I hope the American people don't want that. And if you think these last 3 years have been tough, folks, just because Georgia, the reason I love doing your show, Martha, is because Georgia is the pivotal state. I really believe whichever candidate wins, Georgia will win this election.
Yep.
And folks, do you really want 4 more years of this?
No, we don't.
I don't know.
We don't. I mean, as disappointed as I am in there being 2 80-year-olds running, okay, I'll admit it. I don't mind saying it. I still don't want 4 more years of Joe Biden. We can't survive it. And it's not just the economic stuff, Steve, which is the stuff you and I care a lot about, because we can work our way out of that. I am so terrified of the things that are happening around the world that this president is just weak on. Condoleezza Rice said it years ago, that when America is not strong, it leaves a vacuum that gets filled with things that we do not like. And those things are much harder to come out of.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I know that the people who are the strongest supporters of Biden are, Hamas, Putin, the Iranians, the
That's
Chinese.
That's who wants 4 more years. That's right.
Their vote.
That's absolutely
All
right.
Martha, got it wrong, but it's
I
so good
let
to be
you
with
go.
Let's
And it is go to Unleash Prosperity. You can follow him on Twitter, and he's Steve Moore. We'll be back.